Johann Sebastian Bach. He's the indisputable goat of Western classical music. But every giant stands on the shoulders of those that came before, and in Bach's case, that someone is Buxtehude, Dietrich Buxtehude. Stick around to learn about Buxtehude's profound influence on Bach, and why his music deserves a spot in your playlists, and maybe even your repertoire. My name's David. I'm a classically trained musician turned hobbyist who, despite my best efforts, just can't quit music. So, Buxtehude. Now some of you might be saying, yes, oh my god, Buxtehude, so great and yet so underappreciated. Preach, amateur, preach. And then everyone else is like, Buxtehude? Glad you asked. This video's for you. The pithy answer is that Buxtehude is pre-Bach. Proto-Bach? I could say that he's Bach light, but I won't because that's a terrible gimmicky thing to say. And, well, it's also simply not true. Buxtehude is anything but watered down, and in fact, he stands very well on his own as a titan in the musical pantheon. The slightly longer answer is that Dietrich Buxtehude was a Danish-German composer and organist who lived between 1637 and 1707. He is also someone whom I, and others, consider to be a tragically under-celebrated figure in music history. Buxtehude spent most of his career as the organist at St. Mary's Church in Lübeck, a free city in northern Germany where he earned some renown as a legendary organist and composer. He was a key figure in the Baroque period, influencing many later composers, but especially Bach, who, as a plucky 20-year-old organist-composer himself, took what was supposed to be a 4-week leave of absence from his first ever job in Arnstadt, and walked 250 miles north to Lübeck in order to, quote, understand a few things about his, that is, Buxtehude's, art. And then instead of 4 weeks, he decided to stay for 4 months. History knows this period as that time when Bach went AWOL. We don't know that much about what Bach did while he was there, although Buxtehude may have offered Bach his job, with the not at all horrifying condition that he marry his 50-year-old daughter. Buxtehude himself was 68 years old, an exceptional age for that time, about double the life expectancy of the average 17th century male in Germany. We do know, however, that Bach declined both the job offer and the daughter. But what he must have discovered is that Buxtehude had a pretty good thing going on. Lots of music, support from the church, and autonomy to do his thing. From his predecessor at St. Mary's Church, Buxtehude had inherited and developed a series of evening concerts, Abendmusiken, which had become relatively elaborate public affairs that featured large programmatic pieces like oratorios, often with like 40 or more performers. And while that kind of scale was pretty common down south in Italy, not so much in Germany, which in the late 17th, early 18th century was an extremely poor, miserable, and war-ravaged place, still devastated by the 30 Years' War that ended in 1648. The Abendmusiken were free. Most people were so poor that no one would have come if there had been a charge. And by all counts, they were extremely popular. You could say that these were the great-great-great-grandparents of today's free public concerts. Bach returns to Arnstadt in 1706 with an armful of copied Buxtehude scores and a brain overflowing with ideas. It's important to point out that all of the music that makes Bach the GOAT was written after those 4 pivotal months. His output before the Lübeck trip was very light, some traditional Lutheran chorale settings and a few pieces for organ. Standard stuff for a young church organist and choir master in 1705. But just 2 years later, the most balletic passing of the baton in the entire Western canon took place. Just 16 days after the first of Bach's over 200 cantatas was performed on Easter Sunday 1707, old man Buxtehude died on May the 9th. There's something very special about Buxtehude's music, and here's my attempt to describe why. Many of us have an embedded familiarity with the sound of various eras of classical music or Western art music. And for whatever reason, the earliest classical sounding music that we're familiar with tends to come from the middle to late Baroque period. Bach, Vivaldi, Handel, Toccata in D, the Four Seasons, the Messiah. So, somewhat arbitrarily, at least for most of us, Chapter 1 of music history starts around 1700. For example, the only music prior to 1700 that I was exposed to before I went and studied music at a fancy university was Gregorian chant. And this was only because it had, as some of you may remember, it had a brief period in the retail sun during the late 80s, early 90s, because its meditative quality made it ripe for exploitation by, like, New Age crystal people. But anyway, what I think makes Buxtehude's music so special is that it lies just outside that zone of familiarity. Baroque, yes, but with a whiff of Renaissance. And it's music that just hits differently. It's, so to speak, an old key for an old lock that appeals to a deeper place in our heads, well beyond the frontal lobe, deep inside the Russian doll that is our consciousness. I mean, I was already a fan, but then I listened to a lot of music researching this video, and I discovered moments that literally took my breath away, like this one. Yeah, ach Herr, oh Lord indeed. No joke, I was frozen in place, face in my hands, for like a long time after listening to that for the first time. And not just because it's sublime, but also because I made an important connection. It's one thing to know that Buxtehude influenced Bach, but it's quite another to hear that influence. Here's a section of Bach's first cantata, BWV 4, the one performed just 16 days before Buxtehude left this world. Can I just point out the excruciating bliss of those long suspensions? Now, there's no way to know for sure, but what I hear is Bach imitating a sequence engineered by his old master. A massive God the Father, King of the Universe cadence, followed by a moment of extreme vulnerability. A duet sung in tight harmony that brings us back from the heavens and into a deeply interior place. That place inside all of us where we can't hide our fragility, even if we try. You know, I learned a lot while researching the topic of this here video, as I usually do, but I have to say that this one was an especially rich journey. Above all, I was reminded that one of the reasons why I can't seem to quit music is the bliss out factor. You know, that drug-like effect that some music has to carry us away, to lift us up, often by surprise. And those moments, the ones you weren't expecting, those are everything. So to get you started on your Buxtehude journey, I've included links to all of the excerpts used in this video in the description below. So I hope you enjoyed our time together. I certainly did. Give me a like and subscribe, damn it! And tell your classical nerd friends to come on over. See you next time. Ciao.